Back to another episode of what we are now considering a Health Detective Podcast episode. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will have the privilege of being your host for today's show, episode number 306 of the Health Detective Podcast. Again, we weren't necessarily considering this one an episode before, especially since we just did a live one an hour ago with you guys, but as I've done more and more stuff with our wonderful guest today, Dr. Lori Rose, it's just been so much fun. You guys love our dynamic, and we're lucky because we're just like little goofballs together, nerdy goofballs together. And we do some Instagram stuff every other month, and then we go on Restream, YouTube, Facebook on the alternate month. So, Dr. Lori, thanks for being here with me today.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Lori is currently trooping through that like insane congestion infection that apparently affects everyone, even in functional medicine. It got me, it made me super sick, and she's doing it with grace. So we appreciate you being on because there's very few things that like get me. And I'm like, oh man, that stinks. And then you sound great coming in. And this is our proof that we balance Western and functional medicine because she tried her natural pharmacy first and then said, screw it, I need to get on the podcast with Ev. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Yep. If I'm going public, I was like, all right, we got to put on a different face.
All right. So we're talking about heart health today, and we saw Ryu. Hello. Hope you're doing well, my friend. Say perfect timing on Valentine's Day. So yes, it is. We actually planned this, I think 4 months ago now. Remember, this was back in 2023, and we're like, we got to do this on Valentine's Day. So that's exactly why we're doing it. And we have someone else saying, hello, thank you for this class. You are welcome. We're going to have some fun with it. So for those that don't know who you are, Dr. Lori, because we didn't really give you the proper bio intro like we would on most podcast episodes, real brief, who are you? What do you do for FDN?
Sure. I am Lori Rose. I am a college biology professor of a holistic wellness program. I am a holistic nutritionist, a clinical herbalist, a holistic health coach, and an FDNP. And so I like to merge all of those different arenas in the courses that I teach for all of you at FDN. So I've created a lot of advanced courses for you all. And then I've also created the Health Coach Mastery Program. So just sort of merging all of these modalities.
Yeah, she's really the brains behind a lot of our advanced courses. And Health Coach Master, I wouldn't even call that an advanced course. That's a really genuinely separate course in and of itself from the main FDN one that does the lab. So we could touch on all those things at a different time. And in fact, we have in a lot of the videos we've done together. But today we'll be focusing on the heart health one. So this is one that I have admittedly not like dove into myself. I think it's so exciting though, because when you become an FDN, here's something that everyone needs to understand about the advanced courses. I almost wish we would name them differently because advanced implies, oh, I have to do FDN. And then to advance my education, of course, advanced, I have to go do these. And it's like, well, yeah, they could be used for that, but the way I actually look at them is as intensives. So that means someone from the public could come in and you can purchase one of these advanced courses. So you are actually allowed to do that. And you can go through the course and still get a great benefit from it, even if you're another type of health coach, or maybe you're a doctor, or maybe you're a chiropractor. You don't actually have to be an FDN to do these things. Similarly, nor are any of these courses required to be a successful FDN once you actually graduate. These are just things that you should want to add on. They're things that you should want to do if you really want to serve your clientele at the highest level. Maddie, my fiance, has been doing a lot of stuff recently with clients. Like, it's just really picking up. And now she's adding on all these little advanced courses. She's going through our Dutch training right now, and then she'll be doing herbology next is the one that she wants to do. So yeah, that's a Dr. Lori Rose special. So very cool. With this heart health one, I'm really fascinated by this, especially from the functional perspective. So we can get into details as we go along, but I'm just curious, what was the inspiration for this one outside of the obvious? Everyone wants a healthy heart, but what was the inspiration to create a whole course on this one?
Yeah, this one was really unique and cool. It was a collaboration between Dr. Gupta and I, who's like an FDN collaborative medical doctor. And so what FDN did was create something called the Heart Wellness Panel, where through DHA, you can just say, oh, I want the Heart Wellness Panel, and you get every lab that could possibly be useful in helping assess someone's cardiovascular health. So this course was to, one, get everyone on the same page with the cardiovascular anatomy and physiology, but then to also go through the heart wellness panel, the lab panel, and explain why those labs are in it, how they work, and how they relate to all the different anatomy and physiology of the cardiovascular system. And then, of course, we don't leave you hanging. We let you know, like, hey, if things are wonky, here are all the nutrients and the herbs and supplements, lifestyle changes that you can do about it.
That's probably good, right? You don't want to just show them a panel, but yeah, you're screwed.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sorry, guys.
That'll be $300, and you're good to go. By the way, I see we already have 15 people on live with us. Anytime we do something with Dr. Lori, please, it's very interactive. You're more than welcome to ask questions as we go along here, and we will prioritize them quicker than we would in a normal podcast. We would love to have your questions. Otherwise, I have plenty of stuff to ask as we go along here. I'm curious because, admittedly, I'm not, I know a lot, but I'm not an expert on anything, and I don't pretend to be. I think that's hopefully one of the appeals to me as a host is I have genuine ignorance and I ask about things accordingly. So are there markers like, is homocysteine on
Oh,
there
yeah.
in this panel? And then like what other markers might people see?
So there's dozens and dozens. So it's a
Okay.
really big panel. So it's super cool. And I couldn't list them all right now, but essentially, and this is something that's unique about this course, is I divide the cardiovascular system into three different parts as I educate about it. So I really split up the blood itself from the blood vessels from the actual heart. And I talk about different things that can go wonky in each of those systems, and then the corresponding labs that can tell us about them. So as you can imagine, it's the blood sugar panel, but not just fasting blood sugar. It's A1C and insulin. It's the lipid panel, but not just the lipids. There's lots of different advanced APO panels that most doctors don't usually run. And then LDH, homocysteine, and then there's the full iron panel, and there's the D dimer. There's so many different biomarkers that we cover in this course, because when you look at the cardiovascular system in those three different parts, you can see how there's a lot of different corresponding but separate physiologies that could be going on.
Gotcha. And that was perfect timing. We have a user BFAB, BULLC. I love that. Because they said, can you tell me what the biomarkers in this panel are? So it sounds like there's quite a bit, but we'll go over some of those today for sure. You mentioned that some of these are not necessarily ran by traditional medicine always. And like homocysteine, I know is not one, for example, that's like their top priority, unless there's a family history of health or heart issues. I know that sometimes then it could be brought into the mix. Now, what I'm curious about here is this, because when we're running functional labs, we're getting into more rough waters. And now we're really debating between like the functional people that might not even be traditionally credentialed by Western medicine versus Western medicine docs. This is not the case here. Dr. Gupta is an MD out of Australia. He is a normal doctor, and you are a PhD who is a professor. So I mean, you're a hippie too, but right? Like, it's not like you're just that. You have these very formal credentials, and so does Dr. Gupta, and yet you guys both think that it's worthy to look at these markers. So I don't mean this in like trying to look at the negative of it. I mean it genuinely. Why are these things not looked at in regular medicine when we know that they have relationships to heart health?
Yeah, there's this fact, and I don't know where this fact comes from, but it's somewhere along the lines of, when a new paradigm comes about in the health field, it takes from 15 to 20 years for it to show up in the medical field. And if you think about how the holistic health field educates each other, we have independent schools, we have podcasts, we have social media, we have all these immediate ways to communicate new findings. But the medical field is very heavy, regulated, and it's predetermined, the curriculum that's taught in all medical programs. And so in order to change an entire curriculum, it's, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved there. And so I don't know if that's the reason why it takes so long for things to show up, but it just sort of is what it is. They're slow to respond. But, 20 years ago, when I was first learning about vitamin D or omega 3, doctors knew nothing about it. But now you'll have a lot of conventional
Yeah.
doctors talking about vitamin D and omega 3. And so I think it's just part of the slow process of paradigm change.
It's really interesting that you referenced that because I get tickled when I know something that you know. I'm like, "Oh my god, Lori, I knew that answer." Like, it's like, "Yay." I read that it's probably 2017, and I was reading Dr. Tom O'Brien's one book, The Autoimmune Fix, and he referenced that. So, the specific number that they used, which is within your range, was it takes about 17 years for this new literature, new research to actually get into practice. Now, what was really interesting about the way he said it there, and this is real stuff. I have to find this. Someone just posted this recently. It might have been Jen Maleka, actually. I think she posted it in AFDNP. This there's like a literal study on this. I don't know if that's even the right word for this, but I'll try to find it afterwards and I can put it in the show notes or the YouTube description. The bottom line is it's 17 years for 50% of places to use this and catch up to this. So that still means that another 50% are not caught up yet after 17 years. And you're like,
Oh, that adds to
oh,
it, right? So the cutting edge Western medical doctors take 17 years and then the rest take even
yes.
longer to follow. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, and like I was like, wow, like this is it's very scary in a sense, but it's also it helps you really see what we're working with without a needlessly skeptical view. And you
Right.
should be skeptical. Yes, there's a lot of crazy stuff that goes on. Dr. Lori and I are very aware of that and very much we're in alignment with you guys. We get that. But at the same time, practically speaking, yes, new stuff comes out. There is more new research coming out on a weekly basis than anyone can practically keep up with. And these people, like, they have things called jobs and lives. So, these doctors are seeing 30, 40, 50 patients a day, under their blue light, in their EMF storm of an office, like getting the crappy food. Then they got kids at home, they got a wife or husband, whatever it might be. And they're trying to survive too, just like us. So it's not that you shouldn't continue your education as a Western medicine professional, and they're actually required to do that, right? But what's required is going to be very limited. It's going to be like
Right.
you're going to go to this conference or this seminar, and whatever's taught there is taught. So I think it's almost impossibly hard to keep up with this stuff, and so we need to share this information.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm just gonna interrupt real quick. Well, I don't know if this is funny or not, but an interesting backstory about the heart wellness course is it took way longer than we planned to create this course because Dr. Gupta was in charge of looking at all of the most recent, like even just published research for each and every panel in the course. And so we set the optimal ranges for all of the lab biomarkers, and we didn't just make those up. That was all based on immediately published research or the most recent research on every single marker. And he was so thorough and it took so much time. So these are all research based
Mhm.
recommendations.
Yeah. I can't get too into the weeds on a podcast. It's mostly not from the company, by the way. It's because we're on YouTube. But I will share this one. I love this comment here. Our friend Hello M1M1 said, and you got to make sure those conferences that you go to for CME are not funded by pharmaceutical companies too, with a little. I think that's a winky face. I would agree by that. It is amazing how much influence they have. So, Dr. Lori, in terms of the course itself, again, we can't go through all the biomarkers today. But, when I think of if I'm thinking heart health and something that's not commonly talked about, at least in the normal realm and functional medicine it is, I immediately go to like things like homocysteine. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like I never knew about that. Really, I didn't understand that. And not to mention my family history. It's not an extreme heart issue, what am I trying to say? It's not that my family history has like a large amount of heart issues, but it's happened enough on the male side that, I try to be careful with it. Now, what was fascinating is I ran a panel through DHA Labs. This was called the Evan Transu panel. It's called you just start mixing in a bunch of random crap and then paying
That
money.
looks good. That
Yeah.
looks fun.
It was so funny when I went to, I forget if it's Quest or LabCorp that they sent us to, but either way, I went there and the guy was like, who ordered this? Because he had all these different vials. I got a urine test. I'm like, I ordered this, my friend. And bottom line is, I got homocysteine on there. And this was actually at a point, Lori, I had already I was no longer symptomatic with the 7 diagnosed conditions I had. I won't say reversed or
Mm.
cured. I of course didn't do that. I just didn't have the symptoms anymore, and I still haven't had the symptoms in years. So that's interesting. But besides the point, so I ran homocysteine though, and it was actually elevated even from a Western medicine perspective. And so I'm like,
Wow.
wow, I feel good. I'm doing okay, but I still have this marker that even Western medicine would recognize at this range. What else do I need to do here? And yes, I have methylation issues that I didn't know about at the time. So there's a lot that goes into it. But all of this is to say and lead up to that's like the one marker that I'm thinking of in my head. You brought up vitamin D. What's a marker or two on the panel that maybe people like don't think about or don't know about that you guys decided to include here?
Oh man, you're throwing me under the bus. I'm
You got this. You got
like,
this.
oh, I don't know. There's a LDH, which is an inflammation marker, and it's so important, but it's not included in the lipid panel in conventional medicine. There's the D dimer, which got really is popular the right word? It really got a spotlight shown on it during COVID
Mhm.
because D dimer was a marker that started to go up in a subset of people in the COVID population.
Mhm.
And so these are things that are either sort of new or very uncommon in conventional labs.
Okay. The Actually, it's so funny? I just got it here. I pulled up the heart wellness panel so we can go
Oh
through.
yeah, you can go. I could pull them up too, and then I
Nice.
would sound really smart. But I'm just gonna say I didn't memorize them all, guys.
It's okay. You're so humble too, because you're like freaking brilliant, and like you're always just like, no, yeah, I don't remember that, or I don't know that. It's all good. So, all right, let's go through. Well, I wanted to touch on this anyway because I know that you mentioned vitamin D already, and yes, I think everyone knows, especially in the functional medicine space. All right, awesome. Let's get our vitamin D to a healthy level that is more than what Western medicine looks at. But why is that such an essential thing in terms of heart health? Like, what do we know about that marker relative, or what do we know about having healthy levels of that relative to our heart health?
Oh yeah, this is crazy. Vitamin D is tied to so many different physiological functions, but high blood pressure has a direct connection to lack of vitamin D, and it's really unknown the direct physiological explanation because there are many. Vitamin D impacts kidney function, and kidneys directly impact blood pressure. Vitamin D impacts immune function, which directly impacts inflammation, and inflammation in the blood vessels are, direct causes of high blood pressure. But there is vast research showing low vitamin D levels correlate to high blood pressure.
Have you heard? Well, I'm sure you've heard this, but just for the audience sake, I'm assuming you're aware of the studies about vitamin D levels and just all cause mortality,
Oh yeah.
which
Oh
is
yeah.
insane. And so, for those that don't know, there's only so many markers in medicine that are like genuinely associated with all cause mortality, and vitamin D is one of them. So, not to mention, we're talking a low amount. I think it's like 30 nanograms per whatever. It's like it's not high. Like it's not what functional medicine would consider even a healthy range of vitamin D. And we've shown that up until that level, it's like you're really increasing your risk, or decreasing rather, your risk of like dying from almost anything. So it's kind of an easy win thing. This is
Yeah.
not an impossible thing to get into your system, even if you're super sick. I know that there's a variety of reasons why some people might actually get plenty of sun, or they supplement and they don't actually get higher levels. That might not be the conversation for today. So I was curious about the vitamin D one. Homocysteine, I'm sure I have plenty to learn here. So I know that the higher it is, it's quite a big risk factor in terms of heart disease. Can we touch more about that marker, why it might be elevated in people, and what it has to do with heart health?
Yeah, that's another inflammation one. And it directly correlates to the B6, B12 um, biochemical cycle. And for people who have MTHFR gene mutations, they have trouble converting B12 to B6. And what happens when they don't convert is your body builds up in free radicals because that conversion process creates antioxidants every time there's a conversion. And I'm simplifying here, but if it stops, those antioxidants are not created. And so free radicals build up, they damage the blood vessels, that creates inflammation, and then you get damage to the cardiovascular system.
Wow. So is this something, I mean, because I know methylation issues are not always just as simple as going and supplementing with B vitamins. There's more to it than that. But is that typically who's seeing the higher homocysteine levels? Is it people that usually have some type of methylation issue?
That's a good question. I don't know if the research has been done that's like, oh, every time someone has high homocysteine, they also are MTHFR gene mutations, because I know there's
I don't
other
know.
things that are like betaine, which is found in beets, can
Hmm.
help lower homocysteine, and it's because it has this phytonutrient that supports that B6, B12 biochemical cycle. So, yeah, I'm very interested in that, because here's the other thing. For people with MTHFR, processed food versions of folate exacerbate the issue.
Hmm.
Well, if processed food versions of folate exacerbate that cycle, it just creates more symptoms in people with MTHFR. But it's disrupting that cycle in all people, right?
Right.
So it I'm not necessarily sure that homocysteine is only elevated in people with
Sure.
MTHFR. I think it's also, yes, APOB is in the panel as well. But yeah, I think it's going to be elevated in people with standard American diets.
Yeah, and fair enough, right? So it's a risk factor. You might be more likely to have the elevated levels than someone who doesn't. But
Yes.
it was just it was humbling in a sense to see like, wow, I'm really doing well in a lot of areas, and I still had this not elevated to an extreme level, but it's something that made me more conscious. It's something that definitely made me realize this is something I want to check in with every now and then. And I'm very fascinated actually to run just the whole heart panel on myself. I'm like, why would I not do that? Like, what would
Yeah.
be anything detrimental about doing that? And I get some markers that I want to get anyway. It's always good to check up on my vitamin D, especially, it's this time of year. It's freaking February, man. March is the lowest levels of vitamin D in people
Right.
in the northern hemisphere. So it's really good to check in then. And you wonder why everyone gets sick around
Yeah,
this
and
time of
I
year.
before we move on, I want to touch
Please.
on that because you mentioned it earlier. And something I want to make really clear is the difference between conventional lab ranges versus optimal lab ranges. And conventional lab ranges are set by the conventional medical field, and they're essentially to be like, okay, you're on the verge of dying. We need to medicate you if you're not at this level.
Mhm.
But optimal ranges find hidden background stuff that may be preventing you from being as vital as possible. And so you had addressed all sorts of like, oh, disease states,
Mm.
right? You're here with the conventional ranges, and you had gotten way better, but there's still background stressors, background things going on that could be preventing you from progressing to your ultimate vitality. And that's really what these optimal ranges are for. Finding those hidden things that we may not know are impacting things we may not even think of as symptoms. We may have been living with them all of our lives and think it's just normal, when really, if we address those even smaller things, we feel even better. And those symptoms or those normal things are symptoms that go away.
Great point. Points. I love everyone's engagement. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm going to go back to some of these comments, but I want to address this first because this is important. Someone said, "Oh, you guys are a lab company. I thought this is just an information course." So, functional diagnostic nutrition trains in labs. We also help people get access to labs through our medical director program. We do not sell any labs. We're not like affiliated with any one thing. Like when you go on our medical director program, I mean, there's 60 plus labs on there that we work with and have deals with. Now, we're just talking about blood work today as well. And I'm not saying that you don't know this. Hello, M1. That's funny to say that as a name, but I'm not saying that you don't know this, but a lot of people don't even realize you don't need FDN or anything like our medical director program to get blood work. I mean, we put these nice panels together. That's fine. But there's places like altalabtests.com. And we in America, at least, you do have the ability to do direct to consumer blood testing in most states. This is not true in all of them. I'll put it this way: if you can't do it in your state, you can't do it through FDN. Now, ironically, we can almost get any other lab, whether it's stool testing, hormonal testing, or whatever. The blood testing is some of the hardest stuff. If you can't get it in your country direct to consumer, we can't help with that either. You need to do it through your practitioner or doctor. So yeah, no, our courses, you could actually call them information courses. That's correct. But
That's
we
what
are,
they are. Yeah,
yeah,
they're courses that train you to balance the organ systems of the body and
yeah,
also train you to look at labs as clues into what might need balancing in the body.
yeah, very well said. So thank you for that comment. That's a good clear up for people. Someone said it's because of the form, folic acid that's added to foods and lower quality of supplements. Absolutely. All right. And then we have this one here. I wanted to go back to this. Can we cover this marker? Again, I'll always expose my ignorance. I'm not even familiar with this one, Lori.
Yeah, again, this is like a Dr. Gupta thing. He would like spend hours answering this, but this is one of those things that's on, we add it to the heart wellness panel, the lipid panel, because it's a specific size of lipid that gives different clues into the body. So we don't just have like HDL cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. The LDL cholesterol is broken into different sizes of the LDL cholesterol, and they all have different impacts.
Thank you. And just so, how is this pronounced and what is this called for those on audio that aren't listening to the YouTube side?
This is something I make fun of myself all the time for because I read a lot. And so I pronounce words the way I read them and I haven't heard them. So I call this ApoB.
Oh, okay. Well, I could have done that. Awesome. Thanks. I do the same thing though. It's so funny. You're reading it in a book and then you hear it out loud. You're like,
Yeah,
okay,
I'll
that's
hear a
not.
word and be like, oh, that's how you say that word. I've been pronouncing it wrong the whole time. I've been reading this for a decade.
Yes. Next question here is LPA. I'll stall while you're drinking. Covered as well.
Lipoprotein A. Yes, that is also in there.
Very cool. One thing I wanted to talk, I know we've been talking about the biomarkers, and if you guys have questions about that, please keep bringing them. That's fine. But one of the parts of the description here for the advanced course is controversies, that the topic that you cover, controversies around lipid and protein consumption and heart wellness. I'm like, oh my gosh, my mind goes 1,000 different directions when I hear this. Can we cover what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. And right before I answer that, I want to say, yeah, we've been talking about labs a lot, but this course has 6 different components, and the labs are just 2 of the 6 components. So a third of it is talking about labs, but a third of it is like anatomy and physiology and controversy of the science behind lipids and proteins. And then the other third of it is nutrition, ways to address different parts of the heart, cardiovascular system, supplements, herbs, etc. And so there's a lot of pieces to this course. But yeah, so the controversies, and this gets into, I think it was the last time we met, we were talking about scientific literacy, the
Yep.
scientific literacy course, and how important it is to know how to skeptically read both scientific claims outside of research papers, but also the claims within research papers and address how the research papers are set up. So, right now, the paradigm in conventional medicine is that red meat and animal protein are damaging to the cardiovascular system, and you should avoid them if you have cardiovascular issues. Right now, the paradigm in conventional medicine is that saturated fats, which are animal based fats, right, are damaging to the cardiovascular system, even called the cause of heart disease, and therefore should be avoided if you have cardiovascular system health issues. However, if you dive into the scientific research, and again, if you take the scientific literacy course, it tells you exactly how to go through and like think through these thought processes. But if you look at the experimental setup of literally every study on fats and their impact on the cardiovascular system, you will see that they lump together saturated fats and trans fats
Hmm.
because they're both solid. Well, okay, great. They're both solid, but they're 2 totally different kinds of fats. trans fats are processed, damaged, and damaging fats that directly damage myriad parts of the body. And so any group that has trans fats in it is going to have results that show a connection to heart disease. You don't know if the saturated fats contributed to that or not because they lumped them together.
Mhm.
In order to really know saturated fats impact on the cardiovascular system, you would need a group with just saturated fats, with just trans fats, with just polyunsaturated fats. That data does not exist. So, our common paradigm understanding around saturated fats is based off of very poorly conducted research.
Mhm.
So, that's one facet of this. This is compounded by the fact that saturated fats are found in animals, and everything we know about animal protein in this country is also sort of tainted. So, every study on animal protein in this country is based on animal protein raised the way we raise animal protein in this country, which is with pesticides and herbicides and overcrowded. So they're full of stress hormones, antibiotics, hormones, all sorts of things that we know damage the body on their own, right? And so you have this meat, but you also have all these toxins. And then you do research and it shows, oh, this causes heart disease. Well, you're like, is it the animal protein causing the heart disease, or is it all this stuff the animal protein was raised with? And there's no research on pastured, organic, in the wild animal protein and its impact on heart disease. And that's also saturated fats. So even if they separated saturated fats from trans fats, it's still this processed, CAFO, conventionally raised saturated fat. And so, unfortunately, the research doesn't exist to show us saturated fat impact on heart, animal protein impact on heart. When the science doesn't show you what you need to know, you then look at other evidence, right? Like there's this hierarchy of wonderful science, and if it's there, you should choose it, this epitome of scientific research. Well, it doesn't exist, right? Our data's flawed, the research is flawed. And so then you have to resort to things that, it's not super great science, but it's still considered evidence. And if you look at millions of years of human history consuming animal protein and not having all of these diseases, that's really all the evidence that we have left to come to this conclusion if we're critically thinking, like, how do these foods impact the cardiovascular system?
Wow, well, what a fun topic, right? And that's just one bullet point in the Advanced Heart Wellness course. But and for those just tuning in for the first time and don't know Dr. Lori, because if you talk to enough people, unfortunately, we say something like that, you're going to piss someone off. Dr. Lori is probably like the most open person you're ever going to meet. I don't think you really give a crap whether or not animal protein or not was the best thing for human beings. You just want the answer, right? You're just looking for the answer and the evidence.
I got no skin in this game, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
And I took a very similar approach. If anything, this is something many people don't know about me. I'm more biased towards veganism, vegetarianism. It didn't work for me. That was the problem.
Same.
It's probably the biggest cognitive dissonance that I experience is that I eat meat on a daily basis because I know it makes me feel great and my labs get better when I eat it. I can't hunt right now. Like I would need to be in like the end times to be able. I physically could not do that. It would be a very traumatic experience for myself.
Right, like soul wise, you mean?
I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've watched because my dad actually, I'm at their house right now. My dad used to hunt in this backyard. I would see it as a kid, and I'd watch the thing. It was awful. Like I hated it, and they were, not like they're not barbaric people. They were hunting, and
Right.
quick kills and stuff like that. I thought it was insane. So this is someone who doesn't even want this, and I still acknowledge how it makes me feel and stuff. And that's the problem. The science might show something else one day, and who knows? Maybe we're wrong. The problem is there's science that isn't good right now that is highly debatable as to why it's being even interpreted or shouted out the way it is, and then you actually break it down because no one takes the time to look at the stuff. And even if you do
Right.
look at it, you might not be good at looking at it. I'm not suggesting that I am, right, per se, but I at least try compared to the average person. We're not having just the average person on. This is a PhD that's giving us the opinion about this. And there is a lot of BS science that's shouted on both sides. I'll never not reference this. I know it's not the main point of today, but I have to say this given what you just said. One of the craziest things ever to me was the What the Health documentary, which is largely about veganism. It the owner, so What the Health was promoting veganism. The owner of vegan.com, who is a dietitian, came out and said, you can still find this on vegan.com. We do not want to be associated with that documentary because the science in it is so bad. First of all, even if you disagree with veganism, shout out to them for having that objectivity to say, we're not
Yes.
going to ride the coattails of this because we could. We're going to acknowledge that that's bad and that's not why we're doing this.
Yep. That's called integrity, and that's awesome.
Yeah, but at the same time, how many? It's probably millions of people watch this and are like sharing it and like, oh my god, you need to know this. It's like this is bunk, guys. Like this isn't
Yeah.
just
The
because it's in a
science in that
documentary.
was so bad that I got 5 minutes into it and I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. Because I like to read and watch and see opinions and discussions from every single thought in every single field so that I can contribute and empathize with everyone's perspective, right? And so I can talk to a vegan all day, and I can talk to an omnivore all day, and I can talk to a carnivorous person all day, right? But and so that was part of my quest, just adding to my conversation piece on the side of veganism. And I was watching that and I just couldn't get past 5 minutes. The science was so bad. And so I was so relieved when she published that, because I was like, thank you. Like, if you want to make a documentary supporting veganism, there's all sorts of things you can say. But the science in this movie is all bogus.
That's why your mind's great, and that's why we love talking to you, because you could say if there was an argument, you can make it, but that's not it. That's just called being a good
Yeah.
scientist, right? You're not wrong. We're not saying, well, you might be wrong, but we're not saying you're wrong overall.
There is right and wrong, but there's also different perspectives on things.
Yeah, but yeah, there's if the opposition can make a better argument than the people that are for it, that's kind of an issue. So I'll let you take a sip there of some water, and what I presume to be water, and it could be tea. What are we drinking?
Could be anything. No, it's water.
A few shots of. That's how I deal with you for an hour. All right. So someone said, how do we get someone to research the pasture-raised meat? That info from this kind of research would be very helpful. That'll be the day, Tracy. I'd love to see that one. We got to get someone to fund that first. And to fund it would mean they have a reason, and they have a lot of money.
Research takes funding. And so the people with the money fund the research and determine the research that's done.
Yep. Cool. Another lab question. I think this is appropriate. Can you tell the difference between Quest's lipoprotein fractionation NMR versus their ion mobility panel? Which one do you usually order, Dr. Lori? When you're ordering these on the
anything about this, do you?
No, that's why I was like, I appreciate the person's question. You're awesome. Hello, M1M1. But I'm like, yes, when it's usually on Thursdays is when I order the mobility panel. But then on alternative weeks, I typically order the lipoprotein fractionation NMR.
Yeah, so I wish I could answer that. However, Dr. Gupta, I bet can.
Well, hey, we're due round 2 with him. We've had him on once and people loved him. So I'd love to bring him on live. He's a very intelligent guy.
He did a whole thing with Reed over this course in this panel. And that question may have been asked in that video. So
okay. Yeah, we could circle back with him. That'd be great. And then BFAB BULLC said that's why it's blah 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 from studies, crazy stuff and misconceptions. Yeah, that can happen sometimes.
Yeah.
One more, well, probably 2 more things. I'm just going through our course curriculum here, and you know what, guys? I'm actually going to put this in the chat for you here, and then I will share this on the screen so you guys can check out the course and what we're actually looking at here, if you'd like to look at it. Otherwise, you can just stick around and keep learning something. But there was another thing that said you guys cover the common signs and symptoms of cardiovascular dysfunction. Obviously, we'll never be able to go over this in depth today, but I'm genuinely curious, like, what are some of those common signs and symptoms? Maybe things, that people don't think about.
Oh my gosh, there's just so many. There's like a slide in the course that's like bullet points, bullet points, bullet points, bullet points, bullet points, bullet points. There's so many. And the reason I say that is because Just an anecdote about me personally. When I first started to get into holistic practice, I was scared to death to help people with heart issues.
Mm.
Like, it was something I was like, nope, I'm not touching it, because it was terrifying to me. I was like, oh, something's wrong with your heart, you got to go, right? Like, I'm not touching this. But with more education and training and a full understanding of the symptoms that I needed to immediately refer out for, that's when I started to get confident. And in separating the cardiovascular system into its three parts, the blood itself, the blood vessels, and the heart, and really understanding the symptoms that can show up with each of those differently, the more confident I got that I could help people with cardiovascular system issues, as long as I kept that red flag bullet point list first and foremost in my head. And so I wanted to make sure that was covered in the course. And so you get taught every red flag to be aware of, but you also get taught lab panel results that you may or may not think, oh, that's a red flag, I immediately need to refer out. And so I think there's one that's like, the red blood cell count was raised for 3 tests in a row, immediately refer out. This was low 3 times in a row, immediately refer out. Like, things that are just not as commonly taught are in this course, because I wanted you to feel confident, but I also wanted you to be safe. But symptoms you may not think of as cardiovascular related, like fatigue, a lot of people may immediately jump to mitochondria, or they may jump to the adrenals. But iron deficiency, B12 deficiency, folate and B6 deficiency, those can cause extreme fatigue. They can cause hair loss. Like, hair loss, we may think of as thyroid.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually like, oh, someone's losing their hair, thyroid, run a thyroid panel. It can completely be caused by iron deficiency. And so you never think of labs just on their own. You do clinical correlation, right? So if someone has fatigue and hair loss and they have no other thyroid symptoms or no other mitochondria deficiency symptoms, you might be like, this doesn't scream heart health, but let's run the heart health panel. Something else we talk about that no one talks about is low blood pressure, right? Like, everyone talks about high blood pressure and causes and what to do about it. But I've seen more cases of low blood pressure than I have of high blood pressure. And I was so shocked by that. And so I include causes of that, solutions for that. And so it would take a 4-hour course to tell you all of the symptoms of heart wellness, but it's all about being a detective, right? Isn't that what this is called?
It's certainly the Health Detective Podcast, baby. Yep.
Yeah, it's not about one symptom here, one symptom there. You do an intake, you put all the puzzle pieces together, and then you think about the most possible common denominator to all of those things.
What you had just said too, a part of what you just said was like FDN 101, right? Just because it sounds like something doesn't mean we just rely on that cluster of symptoms, even though it might be somewhat reliable to determine what labs we do. We do the labs almost regardless of the symptoms in a certain sense, and then we make the clinical correlations from there. I mean, again, it's FDN 101, right? Because the way Reed Davis, the founder, always describes this is almost the worst thing that could happen with the sounds like method is you do validate what you think. So, oh, it sounds like thyroid. You run your little thyroid panel, TSH is elevated, pat yourself on the back, and you're good to go. But it never asked the deeper questions of how did we even get to a place where we have elevated TSH? And is that ever going to be the only thing going on? I've been doing this for 7 years. I've never seen that as the only thing going on.
Thyroid's
Ever
a
one
symptom.
time.
Mitochondria dysfunction is a symptom.
Yep.
Heart health issues, those are symptoms, right? Those are symptomologies, not the end all. Like, you got to figure out what made that happen in the first place.
Yeah.
And if you get your answer too soon, you quit digging.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, I appreciate everyone coming on, especially since we just did something like an hour ago. This is amazing. Dr. Lori, you crushed it as always, especially considering you're coming off some illness. I'm not surprised that you're still doing well with it, but like, seriously, thank you. So we'll wrap this up here. I hate to ask such a simple question, but one of the things that I don't like when I listen to other podcasts is all this information is shared, which is great. That's the good part. But it's almost hard to say, like, what am I really going to walk away with today? Like, what am I actually going to go do? And so, my final question for you today, if I may, would be if you could only do one thing to kind of support your heart health, knowing what you know now and creating this course with Dr. Gupta, and maybe it's just lowering stress in life, that's fine. I'm just curious if you have one thing that you'd really try to focus on.
Oh man, that's such a good question.
I can stall for a second if you
I
want.
can only do one thing?
No, no, you can do two or
That's
three.
torture.
2 or 3 is fine.
I would eat whole foods, including adequate protein. I would move all throughout the day and try to get less than 4 hours of sedentary time. And I would work on stress reduction.
Okay.
That's my one thing.
No, well, I love it because you can get real fancy with the labs and there's a time and place. You can get very fancy with the supplements. There's a time and place. But let's start with all that stuff first. That's the takeaway, right? Run the labs, sure, let's do that. I'll run the labs. But if we don't get that stuff down, it's almost like, okay, you can only supplement your way out of this stuff so badly or
Yep.
so much. It's not going to work really well. So thank you so much for your time. I saw Wendy already said thank you. Always awesome. You're always awesome, Wendy.
Hi, Wendy. I was just with Wendy earlier.
Right. Okay. So she must have been referring to you being always awesome, not
Health
me.
Coach Mastery. Yeah, I'm awesome as always. Thank you, Wendy. No, Wendy's awesome.
Thanks, Dr. Lori. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you guys soon.